Hey everybody, this video is going to discuss what is God. And I'm going to be taking a different approach from most people who discuss God. And I'm going to be comparing it with something known as metonymy. And then I'm going to be talking about etymology and word origins. Now, metonymy is something called the substitution of the name of an attribute or adjunct for that of the thing meant. For example, what they give as an example online is suit for a business executive. For example, if I see a person who's a business executive going from point A to point B, I say, look at that suit going over there. That's terminology which is substituted for what is actually being said. So what I'm going to be discussing is if God is an example of metonymy, what is God? And then I'm going to be discussing the etymology or the word origin of God. Many people associate God with being an all-power, benevolent being. However, there are more than one point of view on what God is. Now, the other point of view is that he is an evil being and a non-existent being. This is, I guess you could say, an atheistic point of view. Now, in reality, God is a word, and words all come from somewhere, and they originated based off someone's thoughts or ideas. So even if someone does not technically believe in a higher power being, it does not technically mean that God does not exist, because technically speaking, God is a word, and unless you can prove that no one can say the word God, you cannot exactly prove that he does not exist, or it does not exist. Because you can't say that God is a he or a she. You could say it's an it, technically, because it does not give a gender. Now, here is what I meant by what I am going to be discussing as far as the metonymy. See, God is composed of three letters in the English language. In other languages, he is called El, E-L, or Elohim, Jehovah, Zeus, Brahma, Vishnu, many different names. And I'm going to be discussing these uh, etymologies in other videos, but for now I'm going to discuss where God came from. Now, God in the English language, as I said, is composed of three letters, G, O, and D. And these letters had to come from somewhere. So when they were translating the original manuscript from Hebrew or Greek, depending on which area or scrolls they were translating, these letters have specific names to them that they correspond to. For example, the G comes from something known as Gimel in the Hebrew language. I'm going to be sticking with Hebrew and for this particular video just because it is a little bit older, and technically I could go all the way to the Sumerian language, but I'd like to stick with Hebrew since that's what many people who are Jews or Christians like to prefer to go by. So as far as Gimel, it looks like a check mark in the early Hebrew, an upside down check mark in the middle Hebrew. So this is a check mark. Upside down check mark is like that. Then if you go to late Hebrew, it can be like an upside down Y. And then I'm not going to try to draw the modern Hebrew, but, well, I'll try it. The modern Hebrew looks sort of like, and has a little step to it. And this part's kind of thicker, I guess you could say. So it's an interesting symbol. Anyway, this letter has a particular definition that goes along with it. So the meaning for the G, or the Gimel, is gather or to walk. It represents a symbol of a foot. Now, this letter, it also can mean benefactor. So you have three different definitions with one single letter. As far as the O is concerned, it is called Ayin, A-Y-I-N. It looks like an eye. That is the early Hebrew, or a just plain 0 in Middle Hebrew, or in late Hebrew it looks like a literal Y, and then the modern, it looks, I guess I could have left the Y because it sort of looks like a Y with two little musical notes on top of it or something like that. Now, Ayin, the O, it's a pictograph of an eye, and it can mean to watch, to know, or to shade. You could also say it's a shaded eye, or a watcher, or one who knows, whenever you see that symbol. Now, this leads us into the D, or Dalet, D-A-L-E-T. Dalet translates to mean move, or to hang, or an entrance. It's a pictograph of a door. The early Hebrew looks like an upside down triangle, or I guess if you think Halloween, like a candy corn. The middle is a literal triangle. Think of a trinity. Late Hebrew looks like the number 4. Literal looks like the number 4. Like that. And the modern Hebrew looks like an upside down L. Except it's thicker. Probably thicker than that too. And it has a little lip on it. So that is your D. And those are the 3 letters separately. Now you can also do the letters together. But before I do that, the benefactor. Benefactor, back to the letter G. It can also be a patron, or a investor, or a saver. Now, many people wonder where the Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior came from? Well, it's representative by this G as a saver, investor, one who invests in his creation, one who saves his creation. Now, now let's look at combinations. What if we combine the O and D? We come up with the word odd. O-D. Odd, a going around, a revolving, a continuance, still, yet, again, beside. These are all definitions of odd. Then, odd can also be representative of gamma. G-A-M-M-A. Gamma. This letter is the origin of the Arabic letter Gim and the Greek gamma, supporting the theory that the original name for the letter did not include the L. It's basically what I found on Google. Now, in fluid dynamics, circulation is the line integral around a closed curve of the velocity field. Circulation is normally denoted as this symbol. Now, if you look at this tent symbol, it kind of makes you want to play the game Hangman, where you draw a different body part for every letter they get wrong. Oh, you got a hanged man. Now, if you remember one of the definitions for, I believe it was the O and the, nope, it was the D, wasn't it? Yeah, in the D, the three meanings of the D for delay can be move, hang, or entrance. And gamma just so happens to have a picture of a hangman symbol. So it's starting to connect the dots a little bit. Now, specific weight is gamma or OD or this hangman symbol. Think of Jesus hanged upon the cross. Think of the Judas who hung himself and his entrails splat all over the ground. It's a hangman symbol. The other things that represent the hangman symbol can also be mandrake, which also has its own mythological stories behind it, and it's kind of tied in together with what the hanging is supposed to represent. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, as far as the specific weight, sometimes referred to as unit weight, is simply the weight of fluid per unit volume. It is usually denoted by the Greek letter gamma and has dimensions of force per unit volume. Now, the specific weight and the fluid density are related by acceleration due to gravity. Or, let's see, I'm not sure how to okay. I think that's the letter for specific weight equals GP. G representing gravity and the P for the the pounds per cubic, let's see, the weight of fluid per unit volume. Okay, so in the US, density is often given as pounds per cubic foot. Since G equals 32.2 feet per second squared, or 9.81 meters per second squared, the specific weight of water is gamma equals 32.2 times 1.94 slugs equals 62.4 pounds per foot cubed, or y equals 9 point, here's what I'm getting at. This symbol for specific weight, I don't know if I'm doing it correctly, equals gravity, or 9.81 times 1,000, which is also equal to 9810 newtons per meter cubed. Alright, now, why does this matter? Well, the number 1,000, think of how many years that the beast is in the pit. After 1,000 years, the beast is released from the pit. G, gravity. What's holding him down? So God is basically, if you look at the definition in relation to its letters, is this formula in math. This is basic etymology, looking up word origins, and metonymy, things that represent other things. It's hidden meaning within the text. So these things that people talk about in the Bible, like slavery and rape and all these other things, they have an underlying meaning, and it's not technically about real people. It's not necessarily. Think of astrology. Think of myths. You see a lot of gods going down to the earth to sleep with humans and stuff like that. But each of these myths have underlying meaning behind it. For example, they are tied to the seasons and tied to things that are actually happening as relation to nature. Think of Zeus. He's a lightning god. He's tied to actual lightning and thunder. Zeus literally means lightning or thunder. I'm not looking at the definition right now. I have to look at it directly to see if I'm telling you correctly. Anyway, so what is God? He is an example of metonymy. And as far as this is just one example. There's different methods of showing that this is what he is. For example, if you look at different stories in any religion and compare them to each other, you'll start to realize that they're talking about actual things that are having hidden meanings. For example, we have the creation of light on the first day in Genesis, and then you have the sun created after the creation of light, which many people will say, alright, so that's not possible. You can't have light created after the stars. I mean, before the stars. That just doesn't make sense. However, if you look at the etymology of the word light, it has not always meant what what comes into our eyes. For example, think of how someone says, I'm going to knock his lights out. In that particular sense of the word, light is represented by breath or air, the breath of life. And this was actually a definition for light a long time ago, meaning it was one of its origins, not something that had just suddenly come up. This was one of its origins. So if we're talking about on the first day he created light, and one of its original meanings had to deal with the breath of life or air, oxygen, or basically the atmosphere, it can have to do with any of the things that deal with life in general. So in other words, unless you look at everything that's being said, you can't necessarily say that it's not speaking the truth. Unless you go down all the way to the nitty-gritty, you can't say that it's not speaking the truth. For example, I had mentioned in some of the definitions of the letters, the first letter, G, being gather and walk, with the letter Gimel. Well, put them together. What if you say it means the gathered walkers? G, the Gimel. The gathered walkers, I'm going to show you something that deals with math that existed all the way to a person named Archimedes that was actually recorded. However, this gathered walkers existed long before even Archimedes, because it has to deal with the stars and observation and astronomy and how they did it long ago. And it also relates to the eye and black holes. It's let me basically explain. So, gathered walkers in places like the Bible, the gathered walkers had to do with the two witnesses mentioned by God, and they were also called his eyes that wandered the earth. So the eyes would be the walkers. So in other words, the gathered eyes is another way of saying it. And there is a mathematical symbol by Archimedes known as the Vesica Pisces. It can look like this, or it can look like this. Now, if you look at it like this way, you can kind of see how it looks like an eye. If you give it its little parts and its pupil, it starts looking more like an eye. Give it some eyebrows, give it a nose right here, give it a mouth. You're starting to see how it can resemble an eye. So, Vesica Pisces has its own specific meaning as well. Now, that's only one way of representing these gathered walkers. But if you think about it, it kind of Makes sense. The gathered walker can also be represented by a bright light, whereas the shaded eye, I talked about shaded eyes in one of the definition as well. The shaded eye came from the Ein symbol, which is dealing with the letter O. So you had the gathered walkers and then the shaded eye symbol. Now, if you think of an eye, you have something related to pupils where they constrict. You can open the eye or you can close the eye. This involves the muscles of the iris and inner circular smooth muscle fibers and outer radial fibers. Now, if you remember me talking about some of the other definitions, we mentioned a circular path related to fluid dynamics. Circulation also deals with the eyes. Fluid dynamics, eyes have fluids in them, so and so and so. It's connected, connecting dots. It's tied to the body, tied to the brain as well. And it just, one of the other definitions was the tent door. Our eye, when it closed, it's like closing the door of a tent. Like, for example, if I start the circles like this, what happens if I take the circles apart? Now the eye is closed. It's not open. Right here, it's open. But right here, the eyelid has been shut. However, what happens if I put the eyes closer together? You get more light coming in. So in other words, it's similar to the constriction of the pupil. Okay? So that's part of Vesica Piscis. Gathered walkers can also represent herds or animals. It can also represent tribes, Native Americans, vagabonds. Shaded eyes, animals. They have something called blinders that have been put on them over the years by people who are capturing the animals and using them to add to their herd to tame them to where they don't just do whatever they want. So another thing about the shaded eyes is a black hole. Our universe, whenever it was first being formed, two black holes came close enough to each other to where they combined into a massive black hole and formed the Milky Way galaxy. It's an origin of the universe, our universe story. These shaded eyes, represented by God. The two black holes coming together to form a massive universe. If you read the second verse of Genesis, it says, "And the earth was without form and void." Does that not sound like a black hole or an abyss? And darkness was upon the face of the deep. Now, darkness can translate to mean a relative lack of light. It can also mean weight or gravity or air. Did you know that these are part of the etymology of darkness? Was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God, the gathered walkers, the flock or herd, the shaded eyes, the tent doors, the revolving charitable savor, or it can also translate to mean the worker of planet Earth, the two witnesses, telophase, think of cellular division. Did you know that galaxies, when they form like a cell does whenever it's multiplying? If you look at the nebulas of how stars form, when they and the stages in which they form, it forms exactly like cellular multiplication or duplication, whatever. Either way, it looks just like cellular division. That's it, division. My mind's going blank here. So it's dealing with the Vesica Pisces. So there's more to these scriptures, these verses that you read, than you actually have been looking at. You read something, you think of an imaginary person, an imaginary being, but you don't think that, what if these words had a different meaning back then? What if these words had a more scientific approach? Which, if you think about it, back in the day they had people like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the people where our science comes from, who actually talked about God, Newton, Isaac Newton. I mean, there had to be a reason why they themselves mentioned God in their studies. I mean, they didn't discredit, and they were the scientists of those days. So, why would a scientist back in those days, if there wasn't a reason to think of an all-powerful being, mention an all-powerful being in their studies? Because it meant something else to them. That's all there is to it. Just because the stories were translated in a way to make anybody be able to read them doesn't mean that that's all there is to the stories. That's the reason why you take English 4 AP in high school as an advanced placement course, to be able to learn how some authors added symbolisms and metaphors and all these other things to tell something other than what's just straightforward. So, what is God? He's a word, just as it says in the Bible. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What is a word? It's a form of logic, a form of reasoning. You can look it up. Logic literally translates to mean the word. So if you can connect the dots, logic equals the word equals God, God equals logic, and this logic equals this mathematical formula of God. So, does he exist? Yes, he does. Does he exist exactly the way everyone thinks he does? Not necessarily. So, if somebody asks me, do I believe in God of the Bible or of Greece or of India, I say yes, 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 because I know how to look a little bit deeper than most people, and I would like to teach others that you shouldn't be so closed off just to someone saying that they believe in God. And you shouldn't be closed off to someone who says that they don't believe in God. Because technically, if you want to speak technically, both can be right. If you ever read arguments by Socrates versus what's his name? Was it Pat? No, it's not Pythagoras. I don't remember his name. Let me think. Socrates argument versus, who did he argue with? It wasn't Plato. It's the guy that came up with the number 7 being related to the colors of the rainbow, and he's the one that sparked the argument of the number of the beast and stuff like that. Originally, not in Revelation, not John the Revelator. Protagoras. That's it. Protagoras. That has to be it. Let me make sure. That is it. Protagoras. That's his name. He had an argument with Socrates about basically what it was about was he was saying that all things are measured by the measure of man. And the measure of man was basically saying, like, if one man says this color is blue and another man says this color is green, based off their different perspective, who's to say one is more right than the other? Technically, they're both going by what they have been taught over the years or what they are visually seeing, so you can't necessarily say that one person is more right than another. It's difference of opinion. So, measure of man is argument was like that. For example, if I say, I think fettuccine alfredo is the best food in the world, and the other person says fettuccine alfredo is the worst food in the world, who's to say one is more right than the other? Because the measure is based off that man's perspective or that woman's perspective. So, in other words, there is no winning argument here. The argument is fruitless because you can't convince someone who believes that God exists when they have their own definition of God that he doesn't exist. You can't change someone's mind unless you find something in their mindset that they're willing to change. In other words, what they've been taught has been ingrained inside their head that unless you get down to the very nitty-gritty of it, you're not going to change each other's opinion. And it's just not going to happen. You can give them all the facts in the world, you can give them anything and everything, because each person's going to have their own set of facts, their own set of proofs, and neither one's going to want to listen to the other. However, if you do listen to each other, you can come to an agreement. That's how people formed words in the first place. They came to an agreement on a set standard of rules on how to form these words. So it's like, you can't say something does or does not exist if you don't have an agreement on what you are saying something is. If I say a God is a dog and you say God is a cat, I mean, it's like a mathematical formula where you're trying to assign a value to x, where x equals dog or x equals cat. If x is equal to a dog and x is equal to a cat, that would mean that a dog is equal to a cat, and they're the same exact thing. So there's really no difference whatsoever. They're both right. So that's what I'm getting at here. Where you're trying to disprove or prove God exists, it's a fruitless argument. You can say all day that science is against God's existence. However, I just showed you that that's not necessarily true if you look at it through an etymological standpoint. However, if you look at it from the way that it's written in a mythological standpoint, and you don't go into look what those original stories were trying to say, then yeah, you could probably say, no, it does not make sense. No, it's not real. Yeah, I can understand why you would say that. But, I mean, to say that the reason that the world is the way it is today is because of religion, that's just purely false. Maybe some of it. I mean, because I can understand somebody saying that uh, these radical Muslims who are killing everybody, chopping off their heads, that's just not right. Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, it makes sense to not want to see all these deaths of innocent beings and stuff. I mean, technically, nobody's really innocent unless you're a baby. But, I mean, even so, I mean, the only reason that there's any such thing as a sin in the first place, or an evil in the first place, is because we define it. We define what is good and evil. We define what we think is right and wrong based off our experiences. If we were beaten as a child, we're going to think someone who beats their child is wrong. If we were robbed by somebody and we really liked that thing that was in our possession and somebody takes it from us, we're going to think that's wrong. It's evil. So it's understandable that these things mean certain things. But not everybody is going to look at things what about the person who's doing the heinous act that you call a heinous act? Have you ever tried to look at something from their point of view? What if they're stealing something because they have no money? They have no way to get the money because they were fired from their job. They were just left out in the cold. I mean, what if they're like Aladdin and it's their only way to survive by stealing from vendors in the street? I mean, are you gonna still say that they're in the wrong? Or are you gonna bring them more food because you feel bad for them? I mean, the person who does the beating, I can understand that it may be wrong, but what if they were taught that? What if they were beaten when they were younger? What if they don't know anything other than that? I mean, how can you say it's technically wrong if that's the way they were raised, and they were raised to think that this is just the way things are done? You can't call it wrong if they know nothing else. Sure, once you teach them that it's wrong, or teach them a better way, hopefully they can improve and change their lives around. But look at these islands that are out in the middle of nowhere. Like, there's this one island where they don't want any visitors, and anybody who comes to their island, they literally kill. Are you going to say that their killing of that person was wrong? They told people to begin with they didn't want anybody else to come to their island, so why would it be wrong if you're the one trying to go to their island against what they told you they don't want you to do? How's that wrong? They set a standard of what they wanted you to follow and you didn't follow it. How's that wrong? So, as far as these morality arguments, I don't agree with either side, because even evil people have morality. It's just a different kind. You can have evil morals or good morals, but either way, each person's morals are going to be different because of the way they were raised. An evil person's morals might think that their morals are good and your morals are evil. Who are you to say that they are wrong? So, my standpoint is we can only do the best we can to understand each other. So, just don't go around preaching that something says this or something says that, or saying this in no way is right, because you can't claim that if there was something else that it was supposed to mean in the original manuscript. So that's my take on things. That's my take on what is God. God is the Word. And words, you can't claim words to be good or evil. They're just words. I mean, you can use them for good and evil, but you can't technically say a word is evil. I mean, unless it just literally spells out evil, then it's evil. Yeah. Duh. Anyway, just tone it down a little bit. Your arguments are starting to sound like politics, like left and right. And it's like, it's ridiculous. So, thank you for watching. And try to look more into the documents that you are reading and see if there is a more underlying meaning. I mean, I can tell you, but that's gonna take a ton of videos. So I'll spend time making a few videos here and there, but I mean, I'm not. You gotta do a lot of work yourself. I'm trying my best to write down all my notes so I can eventually publish them and stuff like that, but it's like my notes are like thousands of pages. I take a lot of notes and I do a lot of investigation. It's not just a one-time and it's done. My videos are something that can't be done in 10 minutes or 2 minutes to basically say, oh, this thing's right. It's just not. So, anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope that you've learned something from this.